Hello students, Mr. John here with Chapter 11, Lesson 3, The End of the Republic. Let's take a look at how Rome went from being a republic to a dictatorship and an empire. As soon as the page decides to load. There we go. Alright, so today's lesson is long. We go over a lot, but I already broke down one of our lessons into 2 lessons, and we have much to do. People to see, things to learn, so we're going to power through in one day. Today we learn what went wrong with the republic that turned it into a dictatorship. We learn about Julius Caesar. You may have heard about him. When people talk about the fall of Western civilization, they always, and sort of the Western world, and what could happen, they always cite Rome as an example, and we kind of start to see that decline like today. So pay attention to see how the republic goes from a republic to a dictatorship, what led that to happen, and in the next chapter we'll explore what happened to make the whole Roman Empire fall. So pay attention, and you might see, be able to, in your mind, compare it to more contemporary or modern examples. We'll see. It's quite a tale of greed, corruption, and social unrest. There's even a little bit of romance. Alright, let's check it out. Okay, so Rome was kicking butt and taking names abroad. But back home, they had to do some housekeeping. A big part of it was the poor-rich divide. Basically, the poor people were getting poorer, and people that weren't poor were becoming poorer, but the rich people kept getting richer. And this was happening for a number of reasons. Remember, we had the rich and powerful elite class of patricians who had the money and power, and then the vast majority of the population were the plebeians, the regular guys, Joe Schmoes, a lot of them farmers. The plebes had made progress in terms of government involvement, but the most powerful governing body was still the Senate, which was still patricians only. So they held most of the power. In the 100s BC, the farmers began slipping into poverty. One thing was that their fields, their farms were in disrepair, partially because the citizen soldiers of Rome were always away fighting, so their fields were going into disarray. Many farms had actually been destroyed by Carthage when they were fighting, and for whatever reason, farmers just weren't making enough harvests, not as much as they had before, and they couldn't pay back loans, so farms were getting seized, often by the latifundia, which we'll talk about in a moment here. So another issue is that the farmers could not compete with wealthy Romans that owed large farming states called latifundia. So almost like plantations of 1800s America. These latifundia were worked by free slave labor. These slaves were typically prisoners of war. They enslaved the prisoners of war and made them work on the farms or in the cities, as we'll see in a moment. With farming, for small folk, going down the tubes, many went to the city to look for work, but much of the work there was done by slaves as well. Jobs that could be found were low-paying, so frustration among the plebes was high, so high that leaders began to worry that there was going to be a plebeian revolt. They sated the masses, in part, with cheap food and free entertainment. We're not going to talk about the Colosseum and the gladiatorial games, but it was a big way to sate the masses, as they would go and watch the games, and then they would throw loaves of bread and food at them, like you go to a baseball game now and they shoot t-shirts at you with their t-shirt guns. Same thing, but with food. They were keeping them distracted. Reformers. Let's talk about this. So not all patricians were jerks. For example, Gaius Gracchus and his brother Tiberius were 2 senators, patricians, who fought for reform to help out the plebeians. They basically worked to help small farmers keep their land from being gobbled up by the latifundia, and even went so far as to suggest that the latifundia should be broken up and distributed to the poor. The Senate, however, was filled with patricians that owned these latifundia, and so they did not like these ideas from the Gracchus brothers, and lo and behold, the Gracchus brothers found themselves murdered for their ideas. Okay, let's bump over to military and politics. So, among the woes of Rome, all these problems, generals began to seize political power. Why did this happen? Well, it started with a general by the name of Marius. He was a general that had been a commoner He had been born of a worker, a plebe, and he had become a consul. So a sort of co-president of Rome. We talked about that when we talked about the government structure of Rome. Remember, they had two consuls, which are like co-presidents. He had a jobs program called joining the army. So basically, you had these poor people that were looking for work and no longer had land, and Marius offered them opportunity through joining his army. Basically, these men had nothing to go back to. They had nothing but the army and Marius, and they were grateful to Marius for that. He basically plucked them from poverty and gave them a purpose and a job. And so you have armies, starting with Marius' army, going from what had been citizen soldiers. They were loyal to Rome. Now you have these soldiers that have nothing other than the army itself, and they are now loyal, not to Rome, but to their general, in this case, Marius. So Marius is a consul with a powerful army backing him, not backing Rome, backing him. And this is going to be problems, because the next guy to do something like this is going to be a general that takes over the city of Rome with his army, the power of his army backing him, all loyal to him, and this is Sulla. So Sulla ends up taking control of Rome because he has a powerful army backing him, and he declares himself the dictator of Rome. Remember, a dictator, usually reserved for emergencies, and you could say they were in a state of emergency in Rome because of their domestic problems, and he becomes the dictator of Rome, Sulla. Sulla tried to make reforms as dictator, hoping to restore the republic to its former glory, but he kindly made it worse. There's sort of a power struggle after Sulla steps down, and multiple parties attempted to control Rome, but by 60 BC, there's what's called the First Triumvirate. Tri meaning three. There are now three people controlling the Republic of Rome, sort of an oligarchy, if you will. Their names were Crassus, Pompey, and Julius Caesar. Caesar was a military man, well liked by the masses for his victories in Gaul, sort of a normal Joe Schmoes man. The Senate distrusted him for this because he had all this support from the lower classes. Crassus goes on to die in battle, and the Senate now has to choose between Julius Caesar and Pompey, and the Senate backs Pompey to take full control. So they want to strip Julius Caesar, of his power. Julius Caesar doesn't like this. He marches his army into Italy from Gaul, where they were fighting, and they end up chasing Pompey all the way to the Greek peninsula, where Pompey is defeated, and now what was a triumvirate is just one man, Julius Caesar, who takes control of the government, the Roman government, in 44 BC, and declares himself dictator for life. Uh-oh. Caesar remained popular with the poor folk. He created programs to give them land and jobs, but he was not liked by all, however, like the patricians, like the senators. On March 15th, 44 BC, did I say that right? March 15th, 44 BC, he was stabbed to death in the Senate chambers by his enemies. This day is known as the Ides of March. Every March 15th, you see Facebook and Twitter all filled up with jokes about the Ides of March and stabbing your best friends in the back. There's a whole epic story written by Shakespeare, I believe, written about Caesar being murdered, and probably a million movies about it, in books and comics. It's a fairly popular pop cultural event in history. Maybe look into it. So, yep, the 15th, the Ides of March problem. When Caesar is killed, civil war breaks out. And on one side, you have all the enemies of Caesar, and on the other side, you have three other guys. Octavian, his Caesar's 18-year-old nephew, and then you have Caesar's top two generals, Mark Antony and Marcus Lepidus. They basically go on to defeat these enemies of Caesar, and now you have the second triumvirate. But the second triumvirate of Marcus Lepidus, Octavian, and Mark Antony doesn't last long. Marcus Lepidus soon retires, so now you have power split between Octavian and Mark Antony. But Mark Antony falls in love with an Egyptian princess, Cleopatra, and when the Roman Senate declares war on Egypt, Mark Antony sides with his girlfriend, Cleopatra, and so now you have a war between Rome and Julius Caesar versus the combined forces of Mark Antony and Egypt. They end up having a big, sort of the climax of this war is a battle I want to say off the coast of Greece at a place called Actium. The big naval battle of Actium is a famous battle in the world. And Octavian and his forces win. Mark Antony and Cleopatra sort of try to hole up in, I believe, Alexandria, where they are laid siege, and they commit suicide together because they're not going to win. So now Octavian, the last survivor of the second triumvirate, rules alone. With his influence and a powerful army backing him, the Senate makes him consul, tribune, and commander of the military. That'd be like someone being the president, the Congress, and the Supreme Court all in one. Roll it all together. And that's basically how you get an emperor. Octavian changes his name to Augustus Caesar. Augustus actually being a title given to him by the Senate. I believe it means the revered one. And he becomes the first emperor of Rome. Yeah, and this marks the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire. Where are we at? 11 minutes, and that's it for today. Got a little quizzy-wizzy here on the next page. It's your standard 10-point quiz with 2 attempts. Display your Roman prowess by defeating this quiz, as Octavian defeated the forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra at Actium. Go get it. Alright, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great day. Beware the Ides of March.